Corinth, the underestimated empire. When we talk about ancient Greece, it's easy to focus on Athens with its democracy and philosophers, or Sparta, famous for its relentless warriors. But right in the middle of these giants was Corinth, a city that quietly transformed into one of Greece's greatest commercial engines. Without the pomp of Athens or the muscles of Sparta, Corinth dominated through something subtler: trade. After all, while some philosophized and others waged war, someone had to fund the party, right? Corinth was strategically positioned on the Isthmus of Corinth, a narrow strip of land connecting the Peloponnesian peninsula to the rest of Greece. With the Gulf of Corinth to the west and the Saronic Gulf to the east, the city controlled the trade routes linking two seas. Think of it as the most bustling toll road in the Mediterranean. While other cities relied on their armies, Corinth thrived as Greece's logistical hub. To grasp the impact of this location, imagine a merchant in the Aegean Sea needing to move his goods to the Ionian Sea. He would have to sail around the treacherous Peloponnese, a dangerous and time-consuming journey. The solution? The ingenious Diolkos, a paved road where Corinthians transported ships overland, saving merchants from this risky voyage. Instead of facing weeks of sailing and storms, a quick overland crossing through Corinth sufficed. It was like express shipping in antiquity, but powered by sheer human effort. In addition to the Diolkos, Corinth had two major ports that solidified its commercial supremacy: Lyceum to the west and Centriae to the east. These ports connected the city to nearly all Mediterranean trade routes. On one side, Lyceum facilitated trade with Italy and Sicily. On the other, Centriae funneled goods from the east, such as spices, metals, and even new ideas. Flow of goods turned Corinth into a cosmopolitan metropolis. Merchants from all corners of the known world passed through, bringing not only commodities but also art, culture, and innovation. Corinth thus became a bridge between East and West, something its competitors Athens and Sparta, focused on philosophy and wars, could not match. While Athens prided itself on its philosophers and Sparta on its armies, Corinth boasted its bustling markets and commercial influence. It was a city where wealth flowed, financing magnificent monuments and attracting talent from around the world. Trade made Corinth a diverse and vibrant city, where a blend of cultures fostered a melting pot of creativity and exchange. But Corinth was more than just a city of maritime traffic and port fees. Its prosperity fostered a rich cultural and religious elite. The famous Isthmian Games, held in honor of Poseidon, attracted athletes and artists from across Greece, rivaling even the Olympic Games. Though today overshadowed by the fame of Athens and Sparta, Corinth was one of the most important cities of ancient Greece. Its strategic location, commercial innovations, and role as a center of cultural exchange made it a powerhouse. If Athens was the brain and Sparta the muscle, Corinth was the economic heart that kept the blood flowing throughout Greece. Let's face it, paying a fee for your ship to make a land journey was the definition of luxury service. I can imagine merchants saying, "Have you tried the Diolkos? I'm never sailing around the Peloponnese again." The foundation and rise of Corinth. Every empire has its origin, and in the case of Corinth, the lines between myth and reality blur in fascinating ways. Like many of the city-states of ancient Greece, Corinth emerges from legends, but soon proves that, far beyond the fireside stories, there was a solid strategy that elevated it from a mere colony to a regional powerhouse. According to Greek mythology, Corinth was founded by the legendary Sisyphus, a king known for being cunning, or, depending on your perspective, a bit of a cheat. Sisyphus was famous for deceiving even the gods, which earned him a not-so-pleasant punishment, spending eternity rolling a stone uphill, only to watch it roll back down again. A task that seems quite similar to trying to keep a city-state prosperous in the complicated political world of ancient Greece, don't you think? This legend, however, aptly reflects the spirit of Corinth: intelligence, adaptability, and a certain political trickery. Perhaps it's no coincidence that the city was associated with Sisyphus, a figure symbolizing eternal struggle, but one who always found a way to rise again, no matter the adversity. Leaving myth behind, we come to the historical facts that show how Corinth began to solidify as one of Greece's most important hubs. People had inhabited the area since the Bronze Age, but it was in the Archaic period, around the 8th century BC, that Corinth began to stand out. The city capitalized on its strategic location and began expanding its trade routes, exploiting the economic potential of its lands and ports. Corinth's government during these centuries of growth did not follow Athens' democratic model, nor Sparta's military one. Instead, the city was ruled by a mercantile elite, which made perfect sense given the focus on trade. This group of wealthy merchants and landowners controlled decisions, resulting in a pragmatic and, for a time, efficient government. Corinth also had its era of tyranny, and it was during this period that the city flourished economically in the most impressive way. At the end of the 7th century BC, Cypselus seized power. Unlike modern-day tyrants, in ancient Greece, tyranny wasn't necessarily a bad thing, at least initially. Cypselus came to power with popular support, overthrowing an aristocratic oligarchy and governing Corinth with a direct focus on expanding trade and consolidating the city's power. However, it was his son Periander who truly put Corinth on the map. Ruling from 627 to 585 BC, Periander was a shrewd administrator, though admittedly a bit severe. Under his leadership, Corinth not only prospered economically, but also saw the rise of a vibrant culture. He sponsored the construction of monuments and fortifications, such as the famous Temple of Apollo, and continued investing in the Diolkos and trade routes. Periander was also responsible for transforming Corinth into one of the major cultural centers of the Greek world, promoting the Isthmian Games, which attracted competitors and spectators from all over Greece. In practice, he helped solidify Corinth's role as a cultural and commercial bridge between East and West. And, like any good administrator, he knew that a good tax was never too much, ensuring that the profits from trade passed through Corinth before reaching anywhere else. Who needs an invincible navy when you can simply tax every ship that passes through your ports? Periander and his successors, Corinth transformed into a true commercial empire. Growth was rapid, and the city soon specialized in various products that became famous throughout Greece and beyond. Among them, the following stood out: Corinthian pottery. Its amphorae and pots, decorated with mythological scenes and refined patterns, were symbols of luxury and sophistication. These products were exported throughout the Mediterranean, from Asia Minor to the Italian peninsula, making Corinth a center of art and style. Wine and olive oil. With fertile soil and a favorable climate, Corinth produced vast amounts of wine and olive oil, two essential products in Greek commerce. These items were exported on a large scale, and Corinthian wine, in particular, became renowned for its quality. Textiles. Corinth was also known for producing fine fabrics, especially those dyed with purple, a rare and expensive color. These textiles were sold throughout Greece and even in foreign territories, consolidating the city's reputation as a center of fashion and luxury. To ensure its economic influence continued to grow, Corinth also sponsored the founding of several colonies along trade routes. The most famous of these was Syracuse, founded in 734 BC in Sicily. Syracuse soon grew to become a power in its own right, rivaling even Carthage and Rome in later centuries. Other colonies, such as Corcyra, modern-day Corfu, and Potidaea, also helped consolidate Corinth's control over maritime routes. These colonies not only ensured Corinth's dominance over trade, but also functioned as points of cultural and political influence. Each brought with them Corinthian governance and trade practices, creating a network of outposts that kept the city in contact with the Corinth in the shadows of war. Corinth was not just a commercial power. It also played a strategic role in the rivalries and wars that shaped ancient Greece. Though often underestimated in military terms, its political and naval influence placed it at the heart of power struggles between Greece's greatest protagonists, Athens and Sparta. But how did Corinth navigate the sea of conflicts? With the cunning of a merchant and the strength of a city that knew exactly where its power lay. One rivalry defines Corinth's role in the Greek scene. It's with Athens. But unlike other cities that faced Athens on the battlefield of ideas or pure military engagements, the true battleground between Corinth and Athens was commerce. Athens, with its Delian League, began to dominate the Aegean, controlling trade routes and imposing taxes on other city-states. This, of course, deeply irritated Corinth, which had always been independent in its maritime trade. Tensions escalated when Athens began expanding its influence in the western Mediterranean, an area traditionally dominated by Corinth. The situation became even tenser when Athens founded a colony in Potidaea, an ancient Corinthian outpost. This was equivalent to messing with Corinth's wallet, and we know that messing with a merchant's wallet is never a good idea. When tensions finally erupted into the Peloponnesian War, 431–404 BC, Corinth found itself in a difficult position. On the one hand, it had economic ties and rivalries with Athens. On the other, it shared political interests with Sparta, especially in keeping Greece free from Athenian control. The result was a strategic alliance with Sparta, where Corinth positioned itself as one of the leading members of the Peloponnesian League. Corinth wasn't a military superpower like Sparta, but its navy was respectable. And, as we know, in a war fought largely at sea, that made all the difference. Corinthian fleets stood out in several naval battles against Athens, significantly contributing to Spartan resistance. In 429 BC, for instance, the Corinthian fleet played a crucial role in defending Potidaea, facing off against Athenian naval forces. But like any prolonged war, the Peloponnesian War brought not just victories but also heavy costs. The long conflict drained Corinthian resources and wore down its population, just as it did for other Greek city-states. And although Corinth was on the winning side by the end of the war, the price paid was high, in both lives and drachmas. Long before the confrontation between Athens and Sparta, Corinth had already played an essential role in the Greco-Persian Wars, 499–449 BC. When the Persians, led by Darius and Xerxes, invaded Greece, Corinth was one of the first cities to align with Greek resistance. The reason? The Persian threat to trade was something unacceptable for a city whose existence depended on controlling maritime routes. Corinth contributed significantly with its navy during decisive battles, especially in the legendary Battle of Salamis, 480 BC. The Greek fleet, including Corinthian ships, defeated the imposing Persian navy. The Persian defeat at Salamis was a turning point that not only preserved Greek independence, but also ensured that Corinth could continue profiting from. One thing that set Corinth apart from other cities was its ability to play the diplomatic game. When war was not inevitable, Corinthians preferred smart negotiations to secure their interests. However, this balance of power meant that Corinth didn't always agree with its allies. Although it fought alongside Sparta against Athens in the Peloponnesian War, after the conflict, the relationship between Corinth and Sparta soured. Corinth feared Spartan power just as much as it had feared Athenian power. The city-state then found itself in an ambiguous position. It couldn't fully trust any of its former allies. This led to Corinth's participation in the Corinthian War, 395–387 BC, where, ironically, Corinth allied with Athens, Thebes, and Argos against Sparta in an attempt to curb Spartan expansion in the post-war era. Yes, you're thinking it right. The enemy of my enemy, even though he was my former enemy, is now my friend. Maybe tomorrow he'll be my enemy again. Welcome to Greek politics. On one hand, Corinth thrived with its commerce and naval power. On the other, the long wars created internal tensions. Constant disputes and changing alliances eventually exhausted the city's resources and created divisions within Corinthian society. The population, which had long enjoyed economic and social stability, began to feel the effects of prolonged war. There was growing discontent with the elite that controlled the government and made military and calm. This internal dissatisfaction, combined with the high costs of military campaigns, began to weaken the cohesion of the city-state. The strain caused by the long conflicts not only affected Corinth's economy, but also opened space for factions vying for control of the city, leading to periods of instability. Despite its crucial role in the wars and its commercial influence, Corinth was unable to maintain its supremacy for long after the conflicts. In the 2nd century BC, the city fell victim to the expansion of a new superpower, Rome. In 146 BC, the Roman general Lucius Mummius led a brutal attack against Corinth. The city was sacked and destroyed, its riches confiscated, and its inhabitants sold into slavery. This was one of the most tragic episodes in Corinth's history. The city that for so long had been the heart of Greek commerce and a meeting point between East and West was now in ruins. However, Corinth was later rebuilt by the Romans and became an important Roman colony, but it never regained the brilliance and influence it had at the height of its power. With so many shifting alliances in the wars, Corinthian generals probably had to do something like, wait, who are we fighting this week again? Greek alliance politics must have been as complicated as assembling a piece of furniture without the instructions. Corinth's cultural brilliance. Despite its fame as a commercial power, Corinth was not just a center of material wealth. The city also played a crucial role in the development of art, architecture, and cultural traditions that shaped the Greek world, and later, the Roman world. If Athens was the epicenter of philosophy and theater, Corinth was the cradle of a sophisticated aesthetic and artistic innovations that spread throughout the Mediterranean. If there's one thing Corinth knew how to do besides trade, it was pottery. Corinth developed a distinctive artistic style that left its mark not only on Greece, but also on the cultures within its extensive trade network. Its pottery, especially Corinthian vases, was world-renowned and, for a time, eclipsed even Athenian vases in popularity. Corinthian artisans mastered painting and decorating techniques that became the standard of quality in the Greek world. Their black figure vases with mythological scenes, heroic battles, and everyday themes were prized from Athens to Carthage. These vases weren't just utilitarian objects. They were true symbols of prestige and sophistication, and their export was one of the city's major sources of income. If a Greek citizen wanted to showcase their wealth and good taste, a Corinthian vase in the living room was the equivalent of having a valuable piece of modern art today. Imagine coming home, pouring your wine into those finely decorated amphorae, and casually saying to friends, "Oh, this one? Yes, it's an original Corinthian." Corinth's influence didn't stop at pottery. In architecture, the Corinthians also left an indelible mark. One of Corinth's greatest legacies to the Western world was the development of the Corinthian style of columns, which stood out for their ornate decoration with acanthus leaves. While the Doric, Sparta, and Ionic, Athens styles were better known for their simpler, more elegant forms, the Corinthian style exuded an opulence that became widely popular during the Hellenistic period and later in the Roman Empire. The Temple of Apollo in Corinth is one of the most famous examples of the use of this architectural style in the city. Its robust and symmetrical columns, with elaborate decoration, stood out against the city's skyline, creating a symbol of Corinth's prosperity. This style wasn't just aesthetically impactful, it also conveyed a message. Corinth was a wealthy, refined, and culturally influential city. Interestingly, the adoption of the Corinthian style in Rome shows how far Corinth's cultural influence reached. The Romans fell in love with Corinth's decorative columns and used them in some of the most famous structures of antiquity, including the Pantheon and Colosseum. Besides artistic contributions, Corinth was also home to one of the largest sporting events in the Greek world, the Isthmian Games, held in honor of Poseidon. These games were a kind of cousin to the Olympic Games and took place every 2 years, attracting athletes, artists, and visitors from all over Greece. If Athens had its cultural festivals and Olympia had its athletic competitions, Corinth offered the best of both worlds. The Isthmian Games included athletic competitions such as chariot races and wrestling, but also musical and poetic contests. The crowd that attended these events was a mix of Greek citizens, foreigners, and merchants, all eager not only to watch the competitions, but also to participate in the cultural exchanges that took place during the festivals. The games were an excellent opportunity for Corinth to showcase its hospitality and wealth and to strengthen its position as one of Greece's most important cultural and commercial centers. Athletes from everywhere competed for glory, while merchants made deals amidst the excitement of the crowd. Imagine a sporting festival where, in addition to winning laurels for victory, you could walk away with a new trade contract. The wealth and diversity that flowed through Corinth's ports also meant that the city was one of the most cosmopolitan in Greece. Merchants from different cultures, artisans from distant lands, and even foreigners who settled in the city brought with them their traditions, beliefs, and, of course, their riches. This diversity made Corinth a true melting pot of antiquity. It's possible to say that this blend of cultures also fueled the city's artistic and architectural flourishing. Ideas from other Mediterranean regions influenced the way Corinthians saw the world and, in turn, how they expressed themselves through art, architecture, and religious traditions. This contributed to the emergence of a refined and vibrant culture where Greek tradition fused with influences from civilizations like the Egyptian, Phoenician, and Persian. This cultural fusion, combined with the wealth brought by trade, made Corinth one of the most dynamic places in ancient Greece. The city wasn't just a transit point for goods. It was also a point of convergence for ideas and innovations that helped shape the very concept of Greek culture. The decline and fall of Corinth. Every great city has its peak. Corinth was no exception. However, the fate of Corinth, like that of many other Greek city-states, was marked by the rise of a new superpower, Rome. As the Romans expanded across the Mediterranean, cities that had once flourished under their own power and independence, like Corinth, began to find themselves in a vulnerable position. Eventually, Roman might would forever change the course of Corinthian history. By the 2nd century BC, Rome's power was already on the rise and expanding rapidly across the Mediterranean. The Punic Wars with Carthage and Rome's subsequent victory consolidated Rome as a force to be reckoned with. For the Greek city-states, this meant a new political and military order. Corinth, as one of Greece's wealthiest and most powerful cities, felt this pressure up close. Corinth maintained its independence and prestige for a time, but Rome's growing influence in the Greek world was inevitable. The city was unwilling to submit easily to Roman power, which led to a series of diplomatic and eventually military confrontations. Corinth's fate would be sealed in one of the most tragic moments of its long history. The final confrontation between Corinth and Rome occurred in 146 BC, in the context of the Macedonian Wars, where the Romans were consolidating their dominance over Greece. Corinth, allied with other Greek cities in the so-called Achaean League, attempted to resist Rome's advance. However, the Roman response was swift and brutal. Under the leadership of General Lucius Mummius, the Romans marched on the city, and what followed became one of the greatest acts of destruction in antiquity. Corinth was razed. The city, once prosperous and vibrant, was sacked by Roman troops. Its artworks and treasures were taken to Rome, and its inhabitants, those who weren't killed in the siege, were sold into slavery. The sack of Corinth was so thorough that, according to reports, Lucius Mummius, unfamiliar with the artistic value of the works, warned his soldiers, "If you break any of these statues, you'll have to replace them out of your own pocket." The Romans and their pragmatic view of the arts. With Corinth destroyed, Rome sent a clear message to the Greek world. Greek independence had come to an end, and a new Roman order would dominate the Mediterranean. Despite the devastation, Corinth's story didn't end there. As part of its policy of control over Greece, Rome decided to rebuild the city, transforming it into a Roman colony. In 44 BC, Julius Caesar ordered the reconstruction of Corinth, and the city was reborn as a Roman colony named Colonia Laus Julia Corinthiensis. Its strategic location remained attractive, and little by little, Corinth returned to prosperity. But now under Roman control. The new Roman Corinth was a different city. Although its role as a commercial center was preserved, the city was now part of the vast Roman Empire and followed Roman rules. Corinth served as an important point on Roman trade routes and was inhabited primarily by Roman colonists, freed slaves, and veterans of the Roman army. Prosperity returned to Corinth. The city never regained the cultural and political brilliance it had during its independent days. It was now just another jewel in the vast Roman Empire, and though still a center of commerce and culture, its autonomy was lost. Even after its destruction and rebuilding, Corinth's legacy endured. The influence of its colonies, such as Syracuse and Corcyra, continued to shape trade and culture in the Mediterranean for centuries. Moreover, its contributions to architecture, such as the Corinthian style, continued to be used and celebrated long after its fall. More importantly, Corinth left behind. The city faced invasions, sacking, and destruction, yet somehow always found a way to rise again. Its ability to reinvent itself, first as a Greek commercial power and then as a Roman colony, showed that Corinth's true power wasn't just in its walls or treasures, but in its position as a convergence point for cultures, ideas, and economies. Corinth also maintained its religious significance. Even under Roman rule, the city continued to be a pilgrimage site for games and religious festivals, with the Temple of Apollo and other sanctuaries attracting devotees from across the empire. The fall of Corinth to the Romans marked the end of an era, not just for the city, but for all of Greece. The destruction of Corinth was a symbol of Roman domination over the Greek world, the transition from a system of independent city-states to a unified world under Roman power. Yet, the city's reconstruction under Caesar also symbolizes the resilience of the Corinthian spirit. While many Greek city-states faded into oblivion over time, Corinth remained. Its ability to adapt, first as a Greek trading power and then as a Roman colony, ensured that it left a permanent mark on history. Corinth's legacy, both in its cultural contributions and in its story of survival, endures to this day. And the vases still unearthed in excavations, and the columns that inspired architects for centuries. Corinth may have been destroyed, but it was never forgotten.
When life's challenges come my way, paused and soft, I'll be ready for that day. Very calm, echoing the voice, but still close. Strength and wisdom by my side. Intense, strong, no fear to face, nowhere to hide. Intense. I subscribe to this channel, click like today. Because content like this just lights my way. Intense and slow.